Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We do have good and bad and crazy martinis for you today, but Jim, we must start here. After yesterday, we had so much fun referring to Asa Hutchinson's voter in Iowa. Actually had 191 of them, as you mentioned. But we feared he might pull a Jim Gilmore from 8 years ago and say, I'm gonna shock the world and win in New Hampshire. But that is not what is happening. Asa Hutchinson is now a former presidential candidate, releasing a statement from Asa for America! ! That says, I congratulate Donald J. Trump for his win last night in Iowa and the other candidates who competed and garnered delegate support. Today, I'm suspending my campaign for president and driving back to Arkansas. That could be a reference to the airport congestion there. My message of being a principled Republican with experience and telling the truth about the current frontrunner did not sell in Iowa. I stand by the campaign I ran. I answered every question, sounded the warning to the GOP about the risks in 2024, and presented hope for our country's future. Susan and I are blessed beyond measure, grateful for the opportunity to have fought in the political arena for America. So, Jim, it took him longer than it should have to figure out that this wasn't going to happen, but one state in and he realizes finally it's time to stick a fork in it. So good for him, and I hope the roads are clear on the way back to Little Rock.
Greg, Asa Hutchinson kind of turned into our punching bag this cycle, and it's not that there's anything like inherently wrong with the guy. I to a certain extent, I don't begrudge someone throwing their hat into the ring and saying, hey, I've got a message. Here's my ideas. Here's my platform. But when you stay at 1% for month after month and, you make the debate stage, but nobody seems to notice, at some point, you just kind of have to acknowledge reality. And when these candidates run around in blindly denying that reality, that's when I start making fun of them. That's when I start saying, look, pal, and it sounds like everybody who was initially involved in the Asa Hutchinson bid could kind of see this was not going anywhere after the first couple months and left. And he was left, handing out his business cards at other candidates' fundraisers and stuff. There was something kind of sad about all this. So look, Asa Hutchinson, thanks for acknowledging it. Thanks for not staying in throughout of it. Thanks for not pretending that you were going to go on and win New Hampshire, as that infamous anecdote about Jim Gilmore is. Sometimes it's time to ride off into the sunset, and it appears that is the case. And I guess we won't have Asa Hutchinson to kick around anymore.
His whole thing was, let me sound the warning about Trump, and then Chris Christie got in the race. I don't even remember which one got in first, but Christie's going to do it louder and get more attention. And so once you're not on the debate stage at all, there really wasn't much purpose in him being in the race. But he rolled the dice, got almost 200 votes, and got the message. So anyway, Governor Hutchinson, enjoy your retirement. All right, let's move on to our good martini now. And we talked about lousy poll numbers for Joe Biden earlier in the week. And now there's specifically a really bad one for him in Georgia. The other ones were national, and those are always potentially misleading because obviously the presidential election is decided by the elections in 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And so you got to look at the swing states in particular, one of them being Georgia. And tomorrow Jim will be gone. He's allegedly headed down to Atlanta to give a speech before the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I'm curious to know if you're actually interviewing for the Falcons head coaching job, but I'll take your word at face value. But nonetheless, Trump is leading Joe Biden there 45-37, according to an Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll. And the numbers only get worse there for President Biden. He's way underwater with independents by 17 points. 62% of registered voters are critical. A majority actually strongly disapprove. 10% of black voters say they don't plan to vote at all. And the ones that do really weigh in on his performance so far are evenly split, 45.5% to 44%. So, when the actual voting happens, as you point out there, it's going to be more like 59-20 for Biden. But even if those numbers hold up, it's an absolute disaster for him, given the number of and lopsided black support that the Democratic nominee usually gets. So, Jim, those numbers will probably shift more in his direction as the campaign goes on, and we do still have contests on the Republican side. But no matter where Joe Biden turns right now, he's just getting dismal news from voters who really don't want him around anymore.
Yeah, and you've seen this, kind of cycle. Bad poll numbers come out for Biden. The Biden campaign insists, oh, pish posh, everything is fine. Or you see Democrats worrying about it, talking to the New York Times and Washington Post and other publications about how they're nervous. And the Biden campaign almost inevitably labels it bedwetting. Apparently, David Axelrod is a particular bedwetter, and Biden has apparently kind of grumbled about him. And I think it was Ryan Lizza over at Politico who went back and checked and read Axelrod's autobiography. And right around this time in the 2012 cycle, Axelrod was the one going to Obama and saying, you are on pace to lose this. Right now, Mitt Romney is winning the head-to-head ones. You need to adjust your message. And so I don't think this is a matter of, habitual bedwetting and habitual nervousness on the part of Democrats. I think they look at these numbers and see real trouble. And I think the reason they do that is because there's real trouble. This is, this is Georgia, a state that Biden won by the skin of his teeth. He didn't need it, but it was kind of like the symbolic example of how Biden could win states that had looked pretty red not that long ago. Trump had won the state by 5 points in 2016. And here he is looking weak amongst not just your independents, the folks you might expect, but the folks who used to be the base of the Democratic Party, the rock-ribbed ones. And there's just no good news in this poll for Biden. Around the same time, you can see very similar numbers in the ABC News poll that just came out. This is the one that had Biden's job approval rating at 33%, which is bad. But then you just kind of look at all kinds of, 31% of women giving Biden job approval. By the way, 34% of men. I don't know if I necessarily would have expected that, considering the traditional gender gap. 28% approval amongst independents. 32% amongst self-described moderates. 41% amongst college graduates. Like that's the, bread and butter of the Democratic Party. And then as, just bad all across the board. You could say, okay, older African Americans, those who are 50 and up, he's got an approval rating of 65. Okay, that's great. Amongst young African Americans younger than 50, he's at 32. I mean, these are just, these are numbers that should be like, 5-alarm fire, freaking out the Democrats. And the fact that you're seeing is if you look at the national numbers, oh, well, maybe Trump's really popular in the red states and that's skewing the number. No, the Georgia numbers indicate Biden is weak where he can't afford to be weak. And he's got about 10 months to fix it. Maybe less if you think about early voting. So it's not just the, lousy numbers amongst independents. It's also really lousy numbers against traditional Democratic groups that should really have the Democrats' hair on fire right now.
We should point out that just because people don't like his job performance doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote for the other guy. I mean, if you detest Trump and think Biden's doing a lousy job, you're probably still not going to vote for Trump. You might, but you might briefly explore other candidates, whether it's RFK Jr., maybe Cornel West, possibly the Green Party, if there is a no labels ticket, something like that. But I think the bigger issue here is going to be, all these people stink. I'm not going to bother. That's the bigger thing with these Biden numbers that I think is the greater concern for Democrats, rather than a bunch of people who voted for Joe Biden, perhaps somewhat enthusiastically in 2020, going, "Oh, I'm totally with Trump now." Maybe they are. Maybe the numbers on the economy and the border and everything else have convinced a lot of people to switch. We'll end up finding out, assuming Trump is the nominee. But I think apathy is the bigger issue right now for the Dems.
It's a pincer movement. One coming from one direction. Stronger enthusiasm amongst Trump fans who are like this incumbent stinks, and weaker numbers amongst Democrats who are like, we're really kind of disappointed with what we're getting from this guy.
Hey, let's talk about the great products and the great deals over at 4patriots.com/martini. Right now, you can get things like the Sauna Wrap Therapeutic Blanket for 80% off. That is a phenomenal deal. Plus the Starfire Camp Stove. If you buy 3, you get 1 free. But don't forget about the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. We've seen the bitter cold throughout the Midwest. We've seen snow, a tad in our area, but much more in other places around the country. Be ready if those storms knock out your power. A solar generator charges more devices for longer during a blackout. Then this has double the capacity and more peak power than ever before. Sure, you can take it during the summertime, for the most part, on camping trips and picnics, but use the Patriot Power generator inside your home to power that fridge, freezer, medical devices. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to see this week's discounts and deals before they are gone, and get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And this bad martini starts with the fact that Biden never should have touched this policy in the first place. The Trump administration had placed the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels as terrorists. They were on the Foreign Terror Organization list. When Biden came into office, he took them off, I assume, to pander to the Iranians so he could get them in his good graces and they could reinstate the Iran nuclear deal. That's always been his deal with the Iranians. But in the wake of the Hamas attacks against Israel and the Houthis now causing all sorts of trouble at the end of the Red Sea there at the southern end, the U.S. has made more warnings, and there were airstrikes on a couple different days last week because the Iranian-backed rebels keep attacking U.S. positions and U.S. personnel in the region as well. After the recent airstrikes, the Houthis attacked an American cargo vessel in the Red Sea with a direct missile attack, mind you. And so now the Biden administration is going to reclassify the Houthis as terrorists. Sort of. They're not going to be a foreign terror organization. Instead, they're going to be a specially designated global terrorist organization. You might think there's not a big difference, but there is. Apparently, when you're on the SDGT list, specially designated global terrorists, these Houthis can still get U.S. visas, which they could not if they were on the other list. There's no criminal penalty to support them, and U.S. banks don't have to seize their funds. So basically, this is shuffling a little bit of paperwork, and the Biden administration still is going easy on them after all this time.
Greg, I imagine, like many other listeners, I'm thinking, wait, there's a list you can be on in which you're technically considered a terrorist by the U.S. government, but we're not going to deny you a visa. that would be mean. You got to be able to come into the country. If we kept people who are on the terrorist watch list out of the country, how would they ever launch attack? No. Greg, as I'm listening to this, I'm kind of contemplating how much of this is all like a series of dominoes that fell because of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Because Jamal Khashoggi, Saudi journalist, wrote for the columns for the Washington Post, U.S. green card holder, not a U.S. citizen, but U.S. green card holder, murdered by the Saudis in the consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. And I think anybody with an ounce of decency would say that's wrong. You should not murder and dismember people. Yeah, he may have had some ties to Qatar. It may not have been quite the what he thought he was, but on the other hand, the brutality at work stirred up a great deal of anti-Saudi sentiment in 2019 and 2020. Probably much more than you're used to seeing, because it's not like Saudi Arabia's ever had a good record in human rights. But, Biden was in that debate and he said, I'm going to make the Saudis the pariahs that they are. Well, if they are pariahs, you don't need to make them that. But that's Biden speaking off the cuff, as clear as ever. And one of the first things, the idea was like, well, Biden has to get into office and he's got to punish the Saudis. Now, look, there's a lot of good reasons to object to the Saudi regime and the way they do it, but they also are a fairly important U.S. ally in counterterrorism. They're the ones who run Mecca and Medina. And there's kind of this fact that if the Saudi, this House of Saud were to fall and no longer be in charge of the kingdom, whoever replaces them would probably be even worse and even more openly anti-American. The objective is you work with the Saudis where you can, and when they do something really provocative, like the murder of Khashoggi, you announce certain restrictions. You kind of tell them you got to go in the timeout chair for a year, but you don't try to blow up the entire U.S.-Saudi relationship. And yet the attitude of Biden coming in was, I'm going to do that. And in addition to one of the biggest, you mentioned the taking the Houthis off the terrorist watch list, he also stopped exporting U.S. offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia because they were going to be used in Yemen against the Houthis. In other words, our policy went from effectively pro-Saudi and anti-Houthi to anti-Saudi and pro-Houthi. And now we live with the consequences of that. By the way, let's also point out the perfect hypocrisy of the Saudis, who denounced our airstrikes on the Houthis because of how brutal they were. Never mind the fact that the Saudis were fighting them not that long. There's been a ceasefire, by the way. And it sounds like a lot of people in Yemen aren't eager to get, like, they don't still hate each other. They still vehemently oppose each other. But they basically have decided they don't like they're comfortable with the ceasefire. And just a deeply frustrating state of affairs that we basically, our attitude of, well, anybody Saudi Arabia is fighting must be good, was faulty logic. The Houthis are bad guys. They run around doing Nazi salutes. Their human rights abuses are as bad as anybody. Sometimes in the Middle East, there aren't really good guys for you to root for. And you have to decide which side is more aligned with our interests. And in this case, I think, the Saudis, for all their flaws, don't try to shoot at our Navy or at our tankers or at our cargo ships. Seems like a pretty straightforward message to me. But only in the minds of the Biden administration is this something we're like, well, we got to put them on the special list where they can still get visas.
The Iranians are the bad guys in the Middle East, or at least the worst guys in the Middle East. There's a lot of bad guys in the Middle East. But in terms of their bankrolling of Hezbollah and, of course, Hamas and other terrorist organizations, the Houthis now being among them, clearly based over in Yemen as opposed to more towards the Mediterranean. But a tremendous percentage of the mischief in the Middle East has tentacles back to Iran. And the fact that this administration, even now, won't quite go all the way back to where things were, because maybe they'd have to admit that the previous administration got it right, or they're still trying to pander to the mullahs to resurrect the nuclear deal. I don't know what the reason for this is, but I think they're just trying to look tough without actually doing anything about it, which is just maddening. I mean, there's American lives on the line. There's American commerce at stake here, and it shouldn't take this much provocation for the Biden administration to do a little more here. But apparently we're not there yet. Well, I don't know if Joe Biden has lost sleep over what's happening in the Middle East. It's the one thing he seems to be getting quite a bit of since he's made, a handful of public appearances in the last month here. But nonetheless, if he needs a little more help, or his advisors do, Magnesium Breakthrough by BioOptimizers is the way to improve getting sleep and making it quality sleep. And right now you can get 10% off any order at biooptimizers.com/martini.
Unlike other magnesium supplements that might be giving you just one or two forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Magnesium Breakthrough also helps improve digestion, supports muscle recovery, and supports healthy bone density.
So do yourself a favor and make Magnesium Breakthrough part of your daily routine this year so you can get the vitality you need to conquer your dreams. Go to biooptimizers.com/martini and enter the promo code Martini to get 10% off any order. Again, that's biooptimizers.com/martini, biooptimizers.com/martini.
After taking a longer holiday break than you, Congress had to go back to work. And what did they do? Pass yet another stopgap spending bill to kick the can down the road until March. You keep paying taxes, they continue to not fund the border. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jeff, on to our crazy martini, and stepping away from politics for just a moment, although I will make a quick political reference here. Todd Bowles is pretty well known to most NFL fans. He's currently the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Most importantly to Jim, he was head coach of the New York Jets for 4 years, from 2015 to 2018. He also played in the league, won a Super Bowl ring with the Redskins, recently won a Super Bowl ring as an assistant coach with the Buccaneers, and then when Bruce Arians retired, Bowles became the head man. On Monday night, they handily beat the Philadelphia Eagles and are now in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. They'll be playing against the Detroit Lions in Detroit on Sunday afternoon. Now, since becoming head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Todd Bowles has now had a couple of viral moments. One was in the fall of the 2022 season when the Bucs were about to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because he and Mike Tomlin, head coach of the Steelers, are both black head coaches, that became fodder for a question about race in the NFL. And Todd Bowles handled that in a way a lot of conservatives appreciate, even if a lot of other people in the press room might not have.
You and Mike Tomlin are two of the few black head coaches in the league. I wonder what your relationship is like with him and your thoughts on Steve Wilks joining that fold.
I have a very good relationship with Tomlin. We don't look at what color we are when we coach against each other. We just know each other. I have a lot of very good white friends that coach in this league as well, and I don't think it's a big deal as far as us being coaching against each other. I think it's normal. Wilkes got an opportunity to do a good job. Hopefully he does it. And we coach ball. We don't look at color.
But you also understand that representation matters too, right? And that when young aspiring coaches or even football players, they see you guys, they see someone that looks like them, maybe grew up like them, that has to mean something.
Well, when you say you see you guys and look like them and grow up like them, it means that we're oddballs to begin with. And I think the minute you guys stop making a big deal about it, everybody else will as well.
Yesterday, he was taking questions, and obviously the upcoming game against Detroit is first and foremost on their minds. But this reporter apparently hasn't spent a lot of time looking at any Lions games in the last nearly 50 years, including the one on Sunday night against the Rams, when it was clear, because the Packers had beaten the Cowboys, that if the Buccaneers won on Monday night, they were going to play the Lions in Detroit. So here's the question for Todd Bowles from this reporter and his diplomatic response.
Looking forward towards Detroit. The weather has been a factor in some of the playoff games, even for the most prepared teams. Today it's 13 in Detroit, which doesn't compare to some of the temperatures we tend to drop to. Any special plans to acclimate the team to not only endure but perform in those kind of frigid temperatures should you face them in Detroit?
You do know we play indoors, right? And they got a dome. No, nothing planned. We're indoors, and we only have to be outside for 20 seconds getting off the bus going under the thing, so we'll be okay.
Jim, the Detroit Lions moved into the Pontiac Silverdome in 1975, and they switched to Ford Field, I think 2002 or somewhere right around there. They have not played an outdoor home football game since Thanksgiving Day 1974. And so as a result of the chaos in Buffalo and the cold temperatures in Kansas City, this reporter thought she had a totally legit question, except for the fact that nobody plays outside when it comes to pro football in Detroit.
Greg, when you suggested this as a topic, I hadn't heard the audio, and my thought was like, well, it might be a little chilly going from the bus to the dome, but yeah, we'll be fine. That pretty much was the answer Todd Bowles gave. And so I was like, I think I'm ready to declare this. And I hate to pick on this reporter, but this does seem like one of the dumbest questions ever asked in a press conference. I actually, in preparation for this, I looked it up. A lot of listeners out there who follow football might remember what turns out to be an urban legend, that as Doug Williams was preparing to play in the Super Bowl back in 1988 for the then Washington Redskins, the urban legend is that he was asked, "How long have you been a black quarterback?" And you kind of could imagine my whole life, But really what the thing is that so the person who allegedly asked is a sports writer named Butch John, was then a reporter for the Jackson, Mississippi Clarion Ledger. And the question that he says he recalled, and as far as I know, there's no video of this, no audio. Doug, it's obvious you've been a black quarterback all of your life. When did it start to matter? And as people point out, that's not necessarily a dumb question at all. That's actually a pretty profound one. It's a big question. So he did not actually ask that. The other thing, though, I will say, the greatest answer that I've ever heard from a Tampa Bay Buccaneers coach who was back in the 1970s, John McKay. The Buccaneers were terrible when they entered the league. I think they went 0-14 their first season, 2-12 the next. At some point in that stretch, Buccaneers coach John McKay was asked by a reporter, "Coach, what do you think of your team's execution?" And McKay said, "I'm in favor of it."
Yes, that is true. That's a true story.
So I salute Bowles for handling an awkward question well, and I just a little more homework might be good for some of these sports reporters.
Yeah, you just think you'd be a sports fan, or at least scouting who the next opponent would be if your team happens to win the next day. That's not exactly a huge leap. And, have you ever watched football on Thanksgiving? Ever in the last
I was about to say, the Thanksgiving game is really, really pretty clear out there.
But yes, good on Todd Bowles. That could have been a lot snarkier for a different coach. that could have been fun if you ever got a Bob Knight type in that type situation. If you had asked Bill Belichick, of course, he just would have been, no. And we've all been done.
The dome. So, and who knows? Maybe he'll end up in some dome team. We'll see.
Could be.
He's actually in front of me in Atlanta in the coaching interview. I have friends of the family who are down in Atlanta and who will argue that the Falcons are a sadder franchise than the Jets. I don't know if I buy that, but blowing that lead in the Super Bowl, that stands up there. That stands out. That's pretty painful.
I hope he's directly in front of you in the interview order, assuming you really are interviewing. So then you guys would have to share a waiting room just for a little while, and the awkwardness and the tension of the fact that you hate the Patriots. And he doesn't say much, and so there'd just be this crushing, awkward silence the whole time.
There was before Bowles was Rex Ryan. But this is why people listen to this political podcast, is we can go out to tangents about sports history.
Yes.
So Rex Ryan gets fired by the Jets, gets hired by the Buffalo Bills, and I guess at the NFL owners, there's some sort of big conference in the offseason, and somebody took a picture of Belichick walking down a hallway, and Ryan walking behind him. And Ryan's a big guy, but somehow just his whole body language was like puppyish. Was this this hey, let's talk, let's hang out. This great enthusiasm for whatever he was saying to Belichick, and Belichick, the grumpy lobsterman, is just he just has this look on his face of I can't stand this guy. And it was just somebody put up the perfect caption of, "Boy, do the Jets suck or what?" Because he was now the coach of the Bills.
Oh yeah. Jim, have a good trip to Atlanta. We'll be back with you on Friday.
See you on Friday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell some friends to join us as well. We'd love to have them along. Also, thank you for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. We really do appreciate those. They really do help. So please help out with that if you can. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday, and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.